My name is Don Linky. It is April 18, 2007. We're here on the campus of Rutgers University at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. This is another in the series of interviews that we have been conducting for the Brendan T. Byrne Archive of the Rutgers program on the governor. This morning we'll be speaking with Michael J. Breslin, Jr., attorney, former Bergen County Democratic chair, and member of a very active and veteran Bergen County family, which were patrons of Democratic politics in the county for many, many years. And we'll be talking about the Breslin family, about Mr. Breslin's long career in politics, and his relationship and long association with Governor Brendan T. Byrne. Jerry, why don't we start with your reflections on how New Jersey has changed, particularly in politics and government over your lifetime. Has it been for the better, for the worse? How do you make a take on New Jersey's history over your career?
Well, I think the major change is that when I first got involved in politics back in the mid-'60s and at a local level and the county and statewide level in the 1970s, that politics was more or less of a people's game. Otherwise, people either had some reputation in their community or everybody knew them and they knew a lot of people. Therefore, anybody running for a county-wide or statewide office was important for them to get endorsements from these people, not because of the individual per se, but because of the following of people that the particular person knew. That meant votes. Then in the starting, I guess, with Brendan's election in '73, more his re-election in '77, and Bradley's election in '78, they started to shift where consultants or money started to take over because of television, the high cost of television commercials in the New Jersey area because of the Philadelphia market and the New York market. And it became a reality of life, and that was a shift that happened in politics. And in my opinion, the people were taken out of the process and what they had to contribute. They become less important. The people that made phone calls, the people that licked envelopes, the people that went door to door campaigning on behalf of candidates. And TV commercials became the politics of the day, and right up until its present time. And then, because it is so expensive, money took over and became king, in my opinion. Not only in New Jersey, I'm quite sure it's other parts of the country, but definitely in New Jersey. As an example, in the '70s and early '80s, I was known as in Bergen County area as a political fundraiser. I was pretty good at selling tickets for $100 or $250, and then it graduated up to events. Maybe we'd start to have $500 events. But when it went beyond that, people like me became non-players. I couldn't go to somebody and say, could you contribute $10,000 to the Bergen County Democratic Organization or the New Jersey Democratic Organization? Look them in the eye with a straight face and say, I just want you to be interested in good government, and you donate $10,000. And so basically, as a result of that, myself and a lot of other people like me are no longer in the process, other than going to vote on election day or maybe sending a small donation to a candidate that we support. As a result of money becoming king, I don't think it's been healthy, and I think it's led to a lot of bad government, a lot of bad decisions made by people in government because of the following, and this is the bottom line. I always sensed that when I was involved, or people who were involved, such as Brendan Byrne or Bill Bradley, they were running for office as to see what good they could do with the office for the general public good. They necessarily weren't so much interested in getting reelected. That wasn't everything to them. Today, I think elected officers were only interested in getting reelected, not what good they could do with government. And reflection, I think it was one of the greatest experiences that anybody could have in their life, such as I had, being involved with Byrne and being part of his government by serving on a Meadowlands Commission and the Sports Authority, of things developing, creating and developing things that were positive for the general public in New Jersey, and just this whole frame of mind of being proud of being a New Jerseyan. I think when Brenda left office, that's what everybody who was involved with him could feel good about. I don't think that feeling's happened in the last 20 or 30 years.
We've heard a lot lately about corruption. Do you think that the increased importance of money in politics has inevitably led to more temptation, or have the rules simply changed? Are things that may have been accepted several years ago in terms of relationships, fundraising, relationship between the private and the public sector simply tighter now, and more people are getting caught?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. A, as I said, it was the money, the amount of it being involved in the process. B, I think that attitudes have changed in that I think 30 years ago, we asked somebody for a donation. If you were asking, the person looked at you and said, "Look, I can't even guarantee you getting a postcard from the candidate, let alone an appointment or a photograph, but I'll try my best." Today, when somebody raises money, I think that they're saying, I can do this for you, I can do that for you, I can do this for you. Whether they are authorized to say that or not, I don't, but that's what happens. And I think a little bit of our public morality has gone downhill. It's, if I give you the money, what can I get for it? Where opposed 30 years ago, I don't think that was the case. Because of the size of the amount of money.
Let's go back.
And also, I mean, I don't think that the rules have gotten any tighter. I think they've always been the same.
Let's go back to the origins of your family in politics. Your family is one of the most prominent political families in New Jersey, and particularly in Bergen County politics. Tell us a little bit how that evolved.
Basically, my grandfather, Breslin, was born in Nutley on November 1st, 1865. It was like a year after the Civil War. And he married a woman by the name of Catherine Rogers. They had a farm in Nutley, and about the turn of the century, 1900, they moved to Lyndhurst, New Jersey. They had 10 children, 7 boys and 3 girls. And about, I guess right after Mayor Haig came in power in Hudson County as mayor of Jersey City, towards 1919 and 1920, my grandmother, at that time, was a woman's suffragette and had marched in praise on Main Street in Hackensack for the women's right to vote with other women. But she and a woman by the name of Amy Carston got together with a fellow by the name of Sullivan from Ridgewood and started the Bergen County Democratic Organization with the help of Mayor Haig with some seed money in Bergen County, I guess in about 1930 or 31. My uncles, my father's older brothers, had graduated from college and law school and became lawyers, specifically John J. Breslin, Jr., and he was appointed the Bergen County prosecutor by Governor A. Harry Moore in 1934. And at the same time, he was the first Bergen County Democratic chairman.
To the extent that you know, what provoked your grandmother's interest in politics and women's rights at such an early time in our history?
They were Irish Americans, though both my grandfather and grandmother were born in the States, in New Jersey. They had 10 children. They economically were at the bottom of the totem pole, like most immigrants at that time, or first generation descendants of immigrants. And they were for the little guy, and it was a philosophy that ever since I can remember as a little guy growing up, going there for holidays, was there was always this creed or policy. You have to help the little guy. You have to be for the little guy. And I think in 1928, when Al Smith ran for president, he was a Catholic, and they were Catholics. That got them all involved. And then Roosevelt became president in 32. My family was big advocates of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and because he was for the little guy or the little person, to give everybody opportunity in America, and that was what my grandmother used to preach to us all the time as little children growing up. And she was not too fond of the Republicans or the Republican Party.
What was your grandfather's attitude toward his wife's activism?
Well, my grandfather had worked for the Erie Railroad for 50 years as a telegrapher, and he was a semi-pro baseball player at the time. He was more or less interested in that, not in government or politics, and he wasn't too enamored with Grandma Breslin's avid interest in politics. And he just sat there and thought it was all a lot of malarkey, if I remember what he used to say. But somehow the woman that was the classic Irish matriarch, she raised these kids. They're all 10 of them became successful. There were 3 girls. They all became educators and or lawyers, and the rest. There were the 15 grandchildren. We all had to ascend on her house. Different times of the day we would arrive, but with all on the holidays it was command performance. And at the summertime, she would get her sons, when they became successful adults, to chip in, and she would rent a house in Spring Lake or Seagirt, and we all would go there for the 2-week vacation. As you got a little older and you stayed out of her hair, she would put you up in the attic. You could stay for 4 or 5 weeks. It was a great time, great experience. But again, she'd always be talking positive about the Democrats and negative about the Republicans.
What was her take on Mayor Haig, if you recall?
Of course, because she made her firstborn son the prosecutor of Bergen County, through Governor A. Harry Moore on more than one occasion, she thought he walked on water, and he was a good man because he helped the little person. And historically, if you look at Jersey City at the time, blue-collar people were growing up there, but there was a policeman on every corner. You could have a baby, deliver a baby at Margaret Haig Hospital for nothing. It was great society for the masses, and though, what other discretions Mayor Haig had, I'm not sure she was knew about her. He left power in '49, and she died maybe 10 years later. So I don't know what her later perceptions of him were, but I know she was very fond of him while he was in office.
Did either of your grandparents have direct contact with Mayor Haig?
Oh, my grandmother, there was a trolley from Lyndhurst right to Jersey City across the meadows. So yeah, she went there. He would call her on occasion, ask her how he was doing, or ask her opinion about what particular national candidates looked good or how they were doing. That carried over right until Governor Minor took office in New Jersey, and I saw those little letters from him to her saying thank you for your advice about an issue. And I know at the time Brendan was secretary to Governor Minor. So.
Did your grandmother have any official position?
No. But John Breslin, my uncle John Breslin, was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in I think 36, 40, and 44. He used to tell a cute story at the convention in 44. Roosevelt was going to dump his vice president, and they looked for a new candidate. And they were in the bar in the hotel restaurant, and he was with David Wilentz and some other political powers in New Jersey at the time. They were all delegates to the convention, and Senator Truman came in from Missouri, and my uncle said, he was one of the possible candidates, but we don't think he's going to get the nod, so I think I'll go over and tell him that. So my Uncle John said he walked over and said, Senator, my name is Breslin, I'm a delegate from New Jersey, I'm a Hague delegate, and I'm there with my friends, and we've placing bets, odds here, taking odds of whether you're going to be the vice presidential nominee or who else. So he said, Truman looked at him and said, son, it don't make no difference what you or I think or your friends think. It's what those 5 guys upstairs in the hotel room think. And that was Haig, Prendergast from Missouri, and a fellow from Boston. Those days, and my uncle looked at him and said, this guy's a very bright man. Went back and told his friend, that senator from Missouri is a pretty sharp guy.
Any other recollections of your family with either state or national politicians?
At the time, John Breslin was the county prosecutor from 1934 to 44 in Bergen County. He was also the Bergen County Democratic chairman in Bergen County in 36, 37, I think. And at that time, the Democratic chairman in Rockland County, right over the border in New York State, was a fellow by the name of Jim Farley. And they became very good friends right through Farley's career with Roosevelt as Postmaster General, and even when he became chairman of the board of Coca-Cola. In fact, as a young lawyer, I remember being in John Breslin's office when, the day after the election, Farley and he would get on the phone and talk about, what state went what way, and what state went the other way. They used to, and through that relationship, the fellow who succeeded Farley found a young woman who was a great singer, a talent, but didn't know how to market her and needed some legal advice. And he called Farley, and Farley said, we'll call John Breslin in Hackensack. He could help you out with contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And the woman was Kate Smith, who was a famous singer. But in his day, in the 40s and 50s, John Breslin was in 60s was quite a power in Bergen County. In fact, I have a photograph when John Kennedy came to the Teaneck Armory the Sunday night before the general election in November. There was a big rally, and John is at the microphone introducing Kennedy. The two of them were at the picture. I have to have that from the newspaper at the time. So then he became, matured a bit, and there was a little gap, and then I graduated from law school in '63 and went back to Rutherford to start. When I started working for my Uncle John and his brother Roger in Hackensack, and I said to myself, well, maybe this, having heard all this stuff as a youngster growing up, well, maybe I should get a little involved. And so I got involved locally. I was president of the Rutherford Democratic Club. Then I got involved in a county level as fundraiser. And in 1973, our county chairman had been for 3 years a fellow by the name of Matthew Feldman, who was mayor of Teaneck, and he decided he wanted to run for the state senate. So, and the convention was going to be like in April to pick the candidates for these seats. So he stepped down effective March, some date in March, and it was a special election. And Bergen County at that time had about 1,100 county committee people, and I ran as a candidate against Barbara Werber, who represented the McCarthy and McGovern wing of the Democratic Party, and I represented, like, for example, I was 68 for Humphrey and 72 for Muskie. I worked for both of them. It was a very heated, contested election, and lo and behold, we had this gubernatorial vacancy, and we had numerous candidates in the Democratic Party who wanted to seek the Democratic nomination. Primary one that we had was in Bergen County was Henry Hilstosky, who was a congressman in the 9th Congressional District. He was saying he wanted to run. And then there was Dick Coffey, Ed Crabrill, Ann Klein, no disrespect to who else, but there were a few other candidates. And I won the interim election. It was very heated by 67 votes. And then in early April, after I got elected, I held like a mini convention at the Neptune Manor on Route 4 in Paramus. I had each town there. We had Dixieland band, balloons, and beer, and peanuts. And it was an old-fashioned like convention. And all the candidates that I just mentioned, other than, because Brendan was not a candidate at the time, came and made pitches to the towns for support in the primary. At that time, probably Ian Klein was the favorite in Bergen County because of the McCarthy, McGovern people who, they were like all united behind her, and Ed Crable, Dick Coffey, and et cetera were splitting the other votes. And I was stuck because Hostowski was a favorite son of Bergen County, but he wasn't making a decision. I received a call from Jim Dugan, who was a state senator in Hudson County. He asked me to come down and meet with he and Mayor Fitzpatrick, who was the Hudson County Democratic chairman at the time, and Mayor Bayonne, to discuss maybe if Bergen and Hudson got together and backed a candidate, that would be a good kickoff for a big block of votes for one particular candidate. They could give a candidate the column at that time. I could not, because I only won by 67 votes out of about 1,100 votes cast. And Bergen was an open primary county at the time. But they felt that if Bergen was united with them, it would still be perceived as a lot of strength. So I went down there, and we went through different names, and Brendan's name was one of the names mentioned at the time. And I said, well, I couldn't make a commitment until Hostowski decides what to do. And I went back to Bergen, and a day or two later, 24 hours, 48 hours later, I received the call from, I received the call asking if I would be willing to support Brendan Byrne if he resigned from the bench and ran for governor. I said I was stuck with the favorite son candidacy of Hostowski, but if he didn't run, I thought Brendan Byrne was a great sounding name. He had a great record as a prosecutor. Came out of a strong county, Essex. I thought the name Brendan Byrne would run well in Bergen County, even though nobody didn't know him at the time. And in that it was just immediately post-Watergate that having a former prosecutor as a Democratic candidate would be strong. I thought he would run better in Bergen County than the other candidates that were in the field. Not that the other candidates were bad, they were good, but I just thought he would be stronger. And to be honest, my goal was to have the good, strong top of the ticket that would help bring in Bergen County Democratic legislative candidates and freeholder candidates, because we were on the outs about that time. We did well in the mid-'60s when Hughes was governor, but we had dropped off. And that was my motivation. I thought Byrne. So at the last minute, Hostowski told me he's not going to run. And that was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I got home about 4, at 7:30. The phone rang, and it was Jim Dugan saying that Hudson County had decided to back Byrne, and he was going to resign from the bench the next day at 2 o'clock, and it would be in my best interest to be there. So it was 4 o'clock, at 7:30 in the morning. I didn't have time to consult anybody or do anything. By 2 o'clock, I couldn't call a meeting of people. What do you think we should do in Bergen? So then I said, well, I wasn't going to be in a leadership position. I wanted to lead. And I laid down in bed and I just thought about it. And I said, the hell with it. I think it's in the best interest of Bergen County to have Brendan Byrne as our gubernatorial nominee. And I went down there. And it was some scene. I got there. I was there with Jim Dugan from Hudson County. Herb Klein was assemblyman from Passaic, and myself. We were only three. And Brendan walked in. Mob scene. I've never seen so many photographers or people with microphones. Radio was the big thing. And just the mob scene in that outer room. And he came out, resigned, and we all went up to West Orange to his house. Must have been 60, 70 people there. They got the petitions together, and it was off and running. And in the primary night, he finished second in Bergen County, but he called me up to say, what was the vote tally? I apologize. I said, I'm very sorry. We didn't carry Bergen County. So where'd I finish? I said, you finished second. Good, strong second. He said, thank you. He said, I have the nomination. And off he went.
He was second Dan Klein.
Yep.
Did you or others try to pressure Congressman Helstovsky to drop out, or at least make up his mind earlier than he did?
I did. I did because I more or less tried to do it by having that like mini convention at the Neptune Inn on Route 4, because I thought if he would see, and he didn't show up at all the other candidates, but if he would see that the people in the county, in each town, in the larger towns, wanted to play a role in this election. They wanted to have some role or some function, and as long as he was hanging in there, they wouldn't do anything out of respect or out of loyalty, which is normal. And yes, and I went to him. I said, "If you want to run, run. Let's run. If you're not going to run, let us know." And he just waited till the last minute.
Of course, he had some issues that had surfaced at that time that started his candidacy, isn't it true?
They didn't service publicly. There were rumors, but apparently, that, at hindsight, it looks like that was the main reason, as it turned out.
For the intervention in the immigration matter.
He probably knew about it, but the rest of us didn't know about it, that he had problems at that time.
And I believe Governor Byrne has said that if Congressman Helstovsky had become a candidate, he may well not have resigned from the bench and entered the race.
Yep.
Now, in these sort of negotiations and discussions with Hudson County, who were the others that you came in contact with, apart from Jim Dugan?
It was just Mayor Fitzpatrick and Jim Dugan, and after Brendan announced, I think within I had to go back to Bergen County and hold the meeting that day, resigned, and I held that in my uncle's, John Breslin's office. I worked there at the time, and I had everybody in it. It was I was young. They were older. They were all telling me who did I think I was, Machiavellian, what Spinoza, what did I think, what made me a genius, what made me think this guy was going to win, it was a sure thing to win, and I kept saying, he's going to win. The name, the resume, little post-Watergate, they said the guy's going to be acceptable to Republicans and independents. They're not going to be afraid of him. And in a general election, I think he's going to win big time. They said, well, what about, a lot of them were for Dick Coffey or for Ed Craven. What makes you think they're all going to drop? He said, what about those people? I said, they're going to drop out. I'll never forget one fellow, Shelley Blum, who had been the executive director under Tony Endor in the 60s, what we wanted. He says, what makes you so sure they're going to drop out? I said, I think Ed Craven will be out in 48 hours. And they're laughing and they're saying, look, and I said, I think Dick Coffey will be out in a week. So he said, well, if that happens, I'll kiss your rear end in center field at Yankee Stadium on July 4th. But as it turned out, it did. But what happened, that those people, those candidates had staffs that were running. Brendan was naked, had nothing. As it turned out, I think a lot of people that were with Dick Coffey took over Brendan's campaign and got it running. And I just stayed in Bergen County. I didn't have much dealings with anybody until after, other than Brendan, talking about campaigning in the county or doing things.
Let's go back somewhat earlier. When did you first meet Brendan?
Well, I first met him as a lawyer, and it was in the Morris County Courthouse when I was assignment judge on a motion day. I had a motion that was a little delicate, and he ruled against me, but he was right. And the first time I met him was the day he resigned from the bench. That I spent time with him, then he spent time with me, and you know, that time 10 minutes when everybody else was all running around. But and thereafter he was always very cordial and would return my phone calls. I didn't call him a lot, or if I wrote him on an issue or something, he'd write back. You know, I thought he should be doing it with his campaign. He ultimately would get back to me, and then I would see him in a campaign trail like everybody else. I wasn't in the inner circle on the campaign, but it was important for him to know that the Breslin family and other Democrats in Bergen County were 100% behind his support. In fact, at that time, Morris Pashman was a prominent Bergen. He was from Passaic County, but he was our former assignment judge in Bergen County. He was a justice on the Supreme Court, and so he's dead now. But he called me the day after Brendan resigned from the bench, and it was in the paper. It was in our paper that I endorsed him, and so he sent for me, and I had a lot of respect for Morris Pashman. In fact, I thought he should have been governor at one time in his day. He applauded me for making a brilliant move because he thought he was that confident. He said about Brendan was going to get elected. He said it's the right name, the right resume, the right feel for the situation or the history at that time, the right guy. And even to again make me feel better in a different way, when my uncle John Breslin, who was my legal preceptor at law, said to me, "That was a good move you made, and he better not forget it." That was a different age of politics.
Of course.
And by the way, Brendan Byrne never forgot it.
One of the other candidates that you didn't mention in that 73 primary was Ralph DeRose of Brendan Byrne's home county of Essex.
Very, very, I apologize to Ralph. Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Don, because in the subsequent election for county chairman, I won in March by 67. I endorsed Byrne. He won the nomination. A week later was the county chairmanship race. And I lost by 16 votes because a fellow by the name of Bob Dakotas, not Bob Dakotas, yes, Bob Dakotas, was Ralph DeRose's Bergen County campaign manager in that primary. And he entered the race, the county chairmanship, as a third candidate at that last week because he was angry at the loss, and Byrne won. And Bob got 56 votes, took them away from me, and I lost by 16, which was a godsend because, as it turned out, I had a great relationship with the governor and no political pressure. People would come to me, and if I wasn't enamored about somebody who wanted to be on this commission or wanted an appointment for that or wanted a judgeship, I would just be able to say, well, go see Barbara Werber. She's the chairperson, not me. On the other hand, I could go, people that I thought would be good for the government or good for the administration, I could go to him independently, which I did, and which he responded. Some of the time, you know.
So, Bergen.
And I'll get back to that. And Dominic Presto was the mayor of Charleston in the South. He was Ralph's cousin, and there was big disappointment from the DeRose camp when I endorsed Byrne, and that's I caught a lot of flack for that because Ralph at that time, I think Harry Lerner was the chairman. It was a strong organization. He would have had the line there in Essex, and
So the situation after Brendan Byrne wins the nomination in both Bergen and Essex counties would be that the formal organization was chaired by people who had not backed Brendan Byrne's candidacy, but there was this obvious Byrne relationship with you and Bergen and with Marty Greenberg in Essex.
Absolutely.
Where there was sort of a shadow county Democratic
Absolutely.
organization.
Yep. Well, actually, I was the chairman when Byrne got the nomination. I lost the county championship a week later. Right. You're correct. But there was, and that's a good analogy, because with Marty in Essex and myself in Bergen, there were a lot of support for Brennan at the local level, council people or local mayors from small towns. They just thought he would be the great candidate at the top of the ticket to help them get reelected or to help their local slates win, which happened in Bergen.
What was your relationship with Bob Dakotas, given the fact that it was clear that the Byrne campaign and later the Byrne administration really dealt with you rather than him as county chair?
No, it was Barbara Werber who became.
Barbara Werber.
Yeah. I played a lot of sports when I was growing up. And when you won, you won. When you lost, you lost. And I just stepped back, and I didn't know whether he would still acknowledge me as a person or spend time with me. And he was respectful to her as the chair during the 8 years, and he was very good to me. Very good to me. I couldn't ask for anything more than the guy. And as he was skillful, and he didn't offend her and acknowledged her. And I didn't do anything publicly, and neither did he.
Now that he wins the primary, given the fact that the Republicans surprisingly nominate Congressman Sandman over
Right.
incumbent Governor Bill Cahill,
Right.
were you convinced that there was no way that Brendan Byrne could lose the general election?
Absolutely. And in fact, there's 5 legislative districts in Bergen County. There was at that time 2. We won all 4 of them. Frank Herbert got elected a strong Republican district, District 39, as a state senator. And between Brendan Byrne and Frank Herbert and some other people, New Jersey Transit was created. So, So as somebody who's in the organizational side of politics, that makes me feel good. And put a fellow like Herbert on the ticket, back somebody like Byrne who runs well, helps somebody in a strong Republican district get elected to the state Senate, which then, while there, doesn't waste his time, gets involved with some progressive legislation that's going to help the people. Generally speaking, it makes you feel good.
And one of the issues that affected Bergen County in particular at that time was the proposed sports complex, construction of which later would become a very prominent decision maker. Were you involved after the general election in the renegotiation of the financing package for the construction of the sports complex, which, as we've heard in other interviews, actually occurred before Governor Byrne was inaugurated? Yeah.
At the time, if you recall, the Monmouth racetrack was a very, very viable racetrack. The people who owned or operated Monmouth racetrack, and they had attorneys by the name of Lentz, who did not want the Meadowlands racetrack to be built because they perceived that it was going to be a detriment financially to Monmouth racetrack. Byrne was elected in November, but not sworn in until January. In between, there was going to be a bond issue. New York State didn't want that to happen, so Governor Rockefeller at the time proposed a similar type complex, I think in Sunnyside, Queens. And so whether these bonds were going to be able to be sold or not was one question. The second question was, there was opposition in New Jersey politically for the track, and I had left my Uncle John's office January 1st, 1973, and opened my own office. But he sent for me after the election, November sometime, but before Brendan was sworn in, and said that David Walentz wanted to speak to me on the phone, so I got on the phone, and Bob got on the phone. And they wanted to know if I would handle a lawsuit to enjoin or stop the construction of the Meadowlands racetrack. And it was a long discussion, and I thought about it, and I didn't know whether Brendan was going to support it or not, but I made a decision that if he did support it, I didn't want to be opposed to it or involved with some opposition to it, because I felt he was the duly elected governor, and he should make the decision whether the project will go ahead or not go ahead. So I declined to handle the suit. So, however, spiritually and emotionally, I grew up in that area in Rutherford. I went to St. Mary's of Rutherford, a small Catholic high school. I played 3 sports there, and we had some good teams during my time. And so from a sports fan point of view, I thought that would be the greatest thing for that area of Hudson County, the eastern part of Essex County, and southern Bergen County. I just thought it would be a positive. I thought it would be a tremendous employment factor for a lot of people. So when it went ahead, which Prudential basically made it happen, and as it turned out, McNaughton, who was the chairman of Prudential at the time, bought $50 million worth of bonds to get the thing off and running. And I guess as part of the negotiations with Brendan, as it turned out, that the first appointment Brendan made to the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority was a fellow by the name of Alfred Linkletter. Al Linkletter, who was a senior vice president of Prudential. He was a New Jersey Institute of Engineering graduate. He was an engineer, and then prior to that time, Prudential had sent him around the country where they had lent with the equity lender in big real estate developments. They sent Al around to manage them or observe them to see that they were finished on time and under price. And Brendan appointed Al, and the next one was me. But that was a stroke of genius, though, whether McNaughton gets the credit or Brendan or both. But it was because Al Linkletter really saw that the stadium and the racetrack were built on time, under contract price. And he was a silent hero, because at that time Sonny Werblin was our chairman, and rightly so. He gave us credibility, but if Al wasn't there, the buildings wouldn't have been built on time. So that's just an example of Brendan making an initial decision of doing the right thing. Al, I don't think had ever been to a county committee meeting in his life, and I don't even know whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, but he was a class act, and he got the buildings up, which gave New Jersey credibility nationwide.
With his appointment and your subsequent appointment, did that create any flack within the political organizations in Bergen or even Hudson County? And normally these appointments have quite a bit of influence on the local county organizations. Right.
I think with the Linkletters, that was a business decision, and not many people politically could say anything. Because at that time, the composition was 7 members. The Attorney General was statutory, State Treasurer was statutory, and a Meadowlands Commissioner was statutory. So it was 4 at-large members. I was a statutory appointment, the Meadowlands Commissioner, and then Brendan signed an executive order appointing 1 Meadowlands Commissioner to the Sports Authority. People couldn't criticize me because I endorsed them early, and that was, no, and they felt, well, okay. And it was a non-paying job, so they didn't think there wasn't any opposition. In fact, people probably applauded it and respected Brendan for remembering that I had endorsed them. There was a little bit from some of the newspapers thinking it was a political appointment, but as it turns out, as time went on, I was applauded for doing the right thing many times there by the media and other people.
When were you appointed?
I was appointed, I went to my first meeting. I was appointed to the Meadowlands Commission in August of '74. Then the governor, Brendan, signed an executive order appointing me sometime in September or October. I went to my first meeting at the Sports Authority in October '74. It was the exact day, my first meeting I went to, that we let the contract for the construction of a giant stadium. So the first photo session was with Brendan Byrne as governor, Sonny Werblin as chairman, Timmy Barrett as co-owner of the Giants, Adrian Foley was the treasurer at the time. It was pretty good stuff for a 36-year-old guy who likes sports. It was off and running. It was exciting. Spent a lot of time, and I had children and my wife. I took the children to the site when it was just a circle on the ground. The outline of the stadium was there on the ground, and I said, it's going to be a big stadium, the size of Yankee Stadium. My kids at the time, 7, 8, 9 years of age, they looked up at me and gave me that look like, sure, Dad, sure, Dad. But
Before we go further, let me skip back a bit. In one of the interview sessions we've had, we talked with Frank McDermott, who was the campaign manager for Congressman Sandman in that 1973 election. I asked him whether he thought that if Brendan Byrne had come out more forthrightly, given his large lead in the polls over Congressman Sandman in 1973, for an income tax or another broad-based tax, whether Congressman Sandman could have won. And he said he thought yes, that Governor Byrne could have lost that election if he had come out more directly for a tax. What's your view of that? Was the tax issue so critical in New Jersey then? It's not particularly less prominent now, but would it have lost the election for Brendan Byrne if he had come out for an income tax or a statewide property tax in 1973?
I don't think so, because the sales tax went in, and I forget whether it was, I think it was 1964 or 65 when Governor Hughes was, it was a big controversy then at the time, but it wasn't the do-all of the time. There were other issues, and I think I don't think that if Byrne came out and said, if I get elected governor, we're going to have an income tax, he wouldn't have won by the majority he did, but I think he still would have won, because Watergate was powerful, and Sandman was a star on that congressional committee. He was on television day in and day out, and defending Nixon. I don't think even the income tax wouldn't help him get elected.
During the transition after the November election, apart from your role with the sports complex and negotiations, and part of that, as you said, was as sort of a private attorney.
Right.
Were there any other issues, or did you get involved in the planning for the new administration?
No. Probably the one person most responsible for Brendan Byrne's nomination as a Democratic candidate was a fellow by the name of Ken McPherson in Hudson County. His partner, Dave Waters, was secretary to the Board of Public Utilities, part-time, when Brendan was chairman of the Board of Public Utilities. Dave was not politically astute. He was a good trial lawyer, but he had the highest degree of respect for Brendan when he worked as secretary to the Board of Public Utilities when Brendan was the chairman, and they developed a nice relationship. I think when Brendan or somebody was suggesting that Brendan should become a candidate, that Ken McPherson stepped up to the plate behind the scenes, never got out front, and he's the one that got Mayor Fitzpatrick and Jim Dugan involved, and he set those negotiations in force. After Brendan was nominated, I think Ken was in a lot of planning between the primary and the general election, along with, as it turns out, Dick Leone and Lou Kane and other people that were involved with Dick Coffey's campaign. No, I just did my Bergen County thing and set up headquarters for him there and got people to endorse him and on board in Bergen. I just concentrated on Bergen.
What relationship, if any, did you have with Ken at that point?
With who?
Ken McPherson.
Oh, very good. Always. Ken is a unique human being. He gets along with everybody.
When did you first meet?
At that time, and in fact, in the inaugural, although it's these things you remember. When we stayed at the hotel in Trenton, my wife and I got in the elevator, and in the elevator, going down to the ballroom, was Ken, Sheila McPherson, and Dave and Sheila Waters. So three couples were, and we all looked at each other and say, "Isn't this great?" Young people being part of a winning team and knowing a governor, a real live governor. We were acting like people in their mid-30s should. We were having a good time.
Was Brandenburg the first governor you had met face-to-face?
Yes. No, Dick Hughes.
What was that occasion?
Well, how I got to meet and know Dick Hughes was that, John Breslin again would be sent tickets for the Democratic State Committee's annual dinner at the hotel in Newark, where they used to hold them at the time. And so he wouldn't want. He was up there years. He would give them to me, or send myself and some other young guys in the office. And I'd go and I'd go up to Hughes and introduce him. Say, "My name's Jerry Breslin." Yeah. So he was an unusual guy. He'd say, "Hang around," and he would. It turns out that he was a classmate in law school. My uncle Jimmy Breslin was also who was a mayor of Lyndhurst and also a Democratic County chairman in the 30s. So I knew Dick after he was out of office. And I got to know Joe Katz very well, who was his secretary during the first term, I think it was.
After your appointment to the commission and later to the Sports Authority, what was that like, and who were the personalities, and what were the issues in the early construction and development of the sports complex?
Well, it was exciting, and there was a lot of excitement in North Jersey. There was a lot of Manhattan was worried about the facility going up and the success it might have. So there was always a lot of publicity by the New York papers, by the North Jersey papers, and when I was served, I went there. Sonny Werblin was the chairman. Very, very gracious man. Terrific resume, history, great. A lot of stories to tell. Actually, we're sitting here at Rutgers. He was so devoted to Rutgers. It was unbelievable. It was admirable to watch that for somebody graduating from school. And Adrian Foley, very, very prominent, successful lawyer. He was a terrific guy. He was the treasurer. And of course, Bill Hyland was the attorney general. He sat. They don't come any nicer than Bill, and Bill's a very competent guy. Cliff Goldman was the state treasurer. He was, thank God he was on it. He was younger than I was. But Cliff, just terrific. And I had a lot of confidence in his recommendations when we were making votes on large financial sums. That he had analyzed what we should be doing or not doing, and sometimes he recommended we not approve things, and most of us followed his advice, even though he was the youngest guy in authority at the time. And Al Linkletter, as I said, spoke about before, he was the key to the buildings physically going up. And everybody got along, and every month or every other month there would be press conferences about this. We were this far, this much progress was made, and sometimes we periodically get the governor over we bought the first horse there to the racetrack or something, and it was exciting, the whole area. I mean, that was the name of the game in New Jersey, North Jersey at the time, until those buildings got open. September 1st, 1976, the racetrack. That was, the income tax was passed. The withholding was taken out of the first paychecks a week or so before. And then on October 10th, 76, the Giants played the Dallas Cowboys. That was the action. Everybody was, you walk down the street, somebody was asking you how could they get tickets to the Giant games. And to the credit of the New York Giants, I think they 76,000 seats in the stadium. I think they came over with like 40,000 season ticket holders. So they had 36,000 tickets to give out, and they were very responsive to the New Jersey residents. I think they gave out 20 or 25,000 of those to New Jersey residents, just the remainder to New York people, which I thought was a class thing for them to do. They appreciated what New Jersey did for them, putting the stadium up, and it's a good relationship. In the Meadowlands Commission, we had a lot of things going on, closing the landfills, burning landfills. During my time, we built the largest garbage compactor in the world at the time in North Arlington. We were involved with the solid waste management plan, enacting it, creating districts. We've started toying with the mass bird facilities. There was a lot of Harts Mountain development, and towards the end, in my second, in Brendan's second term, there was a massive project that was going to be built called Berries Creek Center. There was 3 applicants. Harts Mountain, which was represented by Ken McPherson. The Sisselman Project, represented by Lou Caden. And it was a developer by the name of Alan Squitieri, was represented by Henry Luther. And I was the hearing officer. And
to be clear to people who aren't familiar with those names, there were 3 people who were very, very close to Governor Burns.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ken had a lot to do with his becoming a candidate. Lou was his first counsel. Henry was his second or third appointment secretary. So one day, this went on for months, almost a year, so I just decided to get in a car, see if I could go down and see the governor. His little office there in the governor's office. So I went in and explained this scenario to him. And I looked at him and I said, well, do you have any preference? And he looked at me and he said, you do what you think is right. And I ultimately did what I thought was right, and when we finally made the final decision, it was Berries Creek Center and the Sisselman family. But because from a planning and zoning standpoint, it was the right decision. And it hurt me because Ken McPherson was a good friend of mine. Henry Luther was a good friend of mine. But that was that. But subsequently, the Sisselman family got involved in litigation, and it never happened. But so I liked that, being there. We had a young staff. Chester Matson was head of planning. Ultimately became head of planning for Bergen County. George Casino was a young engineer. And Rich Roberts was the transportation guy. They were all people basically that were recruited by Paul Yibelschlacker, who was the first Commissioner of Environmental Protection for Dick Hughes, and Cliff Goldman, who I think was just first acting executive director of the Meadowlands Commission. And they were all blue chippers, and I had a lot of fun with them. And I think we did a lot of positive things. To this day, when I ride down the turnpike, east of Leesboro or west of Leesboro, I look at the closed landfills. Some buildings are up at Harts Mountain. To their credit, put their money where their mouth was, and they did most of the development in the Meadowlands District.
So looking back, do you think that the Meadowlands today fulfilled the expectations and planning of the 70s?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a lot of orderly development that peacefully coexisted with the environment. There were a lot of environmental improvements made with money that were extracted gracefully from developers to fund these environmental. There's been a lot of acreage saved for open spaces over the years, which was initiated in the 70s and being done right up until the present time.
Any other memories or recollections of issues or personalities involved with the Meadowlands? Well, let me put you on the spot. What was Sonny Werblin like in terms of a manager? He's, I think, over the years had the reputation of a very dynamic lone wolf. Did he take against direction or suggestions from the outside?
Marketing was Sonny's key. Administration was not. But for him, the authority probably would not have had credibility at the time the bonds were going to be issued. However, getting the buildings up and getting them to operate and to be functional laid at the feet of a fellow by the name of Jack Crumpy, who was our first executive director, who Sonny recruited. But he was a dynamic, very behind-the-scenes, successful, organized business person. And together, I mean, that was from the organization, putting the organization together, hiring the right people to make it run. And Al Linkler, as I said previously, about the construction of the buildings. At the time we opened, there was a lot of pressure for political appointments to the authority for the jobs and what have you. Also, there was litigation by the borough of East Rutherford. It was represented by then Al Puro against the authority because the negative impact they were going to have on the infrastructure of East Rutherford, with their police department, fire department, et cetera, et cetera. I basically, Crumpy chose me because I was from the area to be the mediator or the negotiator with that. The political jobs were kept to a minimum. There was some, we would like attendants in a parking lot or some pari-mutuel clerks. We did make some exceptions, but basically the people that managed the stadium and the racetrack were all professionals, or they were young people out of school who were going to be trained properly and ultimately ended up being very successful sports executives, such as the Michael Rose of the world, who started in the bowels of the authority and rose up to be executive director, president of the Nets, and Bob Mulcahy. He wasn't that young, but I mean, there's other people that in racing that now run tracks throughout the country. I think because politics was kept to a minimum, the sports complex was a successful venture. I think the Meadowlands became a success for the same reason, that politics was kept to a minimum, which required some discipline upon people who were commissioners or authority members, sports authority members.
Of course, when Bob Mulcahy was appointed, he was coming from the governor's office and chief of staff. Was there criticism at the time that was a political appointment by Governor Burns?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, myself, I felt a little hesitant about it because it was the first time we took somebody from the political arena for that job. In fact, previously, I was chairman of the search committee for the executive director when Crumpy left, and we promoted from within a fellow by the name of Bob Harter, H-A-R-T-E-R, who was our chief financial officer, who came from an accounting firm that, and from there, the accounting firm, he went to Madison Square Garden, and we took him from there. But he went to, John McMullen hired him away to run the Houston Astrodome, and that's the issue. And then the governor initiated Bob, and I was a little concerned. But as time passed, he did that function as a politician. He functioned as an executive, and he continued the philosophy that existed previous to his getting there.
Did you express your concerns to Governor Burns?
I expressed them to Bob. I said, personally, I just pulled him aside, and I said, traditionally, historically, even though I came from the political sector, the authority didn't function as a political organization. But I said, I'm willing to step back and watch. And he proved that my concerns weren't worth anything.
One other controversial issue toward the end of Governor Burns' administration was the naming of the arena.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, we had a closed session, and at that time, there were 7 of us sitting there. At that time, Werblin had left. Adrian Foley had left. So the chairman was Bill Hyland. The Attorney General was John Degnan. Treasurer was still Cliff. He was there. At-large members were Peter Levine. Bob Ferguson was head of First Bank, State Bank. Myself. I think that's 6. I can't remember what the 7th was. But I'm sitting there at the meeting, and Peter Levine started brought up a new business. The fact that Brendan Byrne historically has been a great governor, a great leader, and it kept going on and on and on. So I started looking around the table, and I could see from the body language on 2 or 3 other members that somebody had phone calls before that meeting, and so I said, I looked at it and I just said to Peter, I said, Peter, we don't need any campaign speeches. He can't run anymore. He was elected twice. And then Peter stopped and said, no, we ought to name the building after him. So I looked at Peter, and I looked around, and I said, are you fellas crazy? I said, if you all think you're doing this because you're his friend, I think you have another thing coming. If you think the uproar over the income tax was bad, if we do this, it's gonna be some uproar. And I know John Degnan hit me and said, what are you saying? You're his friend, Jerry. I say, I am his friend. That's why I'm saying that we ought to think about this. But then I called up, got an appointment, and I went to see him. I told him what happened. He looked at me. Brendan looked at me and said, "Do you think it's a bad idea?" And I looked at him and said, "Depends. It's a matter of timing when we do it." But and then we did it. And once it was done, in fact, at the public meeting, I made the motion to make. But I'll never forget Bill Hyland's remarks at the dedication, where we put the plaque up naming it the Brendan Byrne Arena. Bill said that doers and shakers build things and critics criticize. And the 7 of us up here, and those who preceded us, and the workers, the architects, the contractor, the workers, built this thing. But under the leadership of Brendan Byrne. But that was a good line. I've used that many times since.
Talk about some of the other personalities that you came into contact with through the Sports Authority in the Meadowlands. How about Wellington Mara?
Well, Wellington Mara was a Fordham graduate, class of 1937, and his executive director, Ray Walsh, they were classmates. And they had a fellow by the name of Vic Del Gershio who also worked in our organization. Walsh and Del Gershio were the Eastern Collegiate Doubles Championship and champions in 1937. And Vince Lombardi was their classmate. And so when I was on the authority, and Brendan had renegotiated the lease with the Giants with the help of some people who were on this transition team, and I think rightfully so, the things that they did. But Mary used to kid me all the time by saying, he knew my uncles he used to kid me all the time. He said, Jerry, never forget, you're our Fordham man on that authority when things were good. But he was a gentleman. His relationship with the 7 authority members was very professional. He and Sonny were very, very close, had a lot of respect for each other. And I would say of the 7 people on the authority, I was the less prominent or something, but he treated me as a gentleman. And I would say Sonny Werblin and his wife and his family treated my wife and I and my kids like we were the most important person on the authority. It was just a good atmosphere there. And, but Werblin, I never forget, I had to negotiate a little meeting when I first went on. Bill Combe was the public relations consultant to the authority. When Brendan appointed me, he wanted me to set up a meeting between Sonny Werblin and Brendan. It would sort of be like a sit-down powwow. The reason being is Governor Cahill and Brendan were 2 different type personalities. Brendan Byrne would be up early in the morning, read 5 newspapers, jump in the pool, and go to bed early at night. Or Bill Cahill would apparently get up a little later and stay out socially with people at night in restaurants and stuff, and which was Werblin's lifestyle. I think that Sonny initially had a feeling that Brendan didn't like him because he wouldn't go drink martinis with him until 11 or 12, like the 21 Club. And so I set this meeting up, and they got along, and ultimately Brendan would go to 21 Club with Sonny and have lunch, but not dinner. And then they got along. But I would say I've had dinner with Phil Esposito, with Sonny at the racetrack, who was a famous hockey player at the time. I was in that box, the governor's box, with a woman, and we were cheering and yelling at the racetrack for a horse to come into the finish line, and she was slapping my hands, giving me high fives. It was Sarah Vaughan, who grew up in Newark, famous singer back in the 40s and 50s. I'm at a Giant game, in the box, standing up, talking to a fellow, a tall, bald-headed man about Giant. He says to me that it was the first game. He said, the Giants aren't blocking the offensive line. This fellow, Larry Zonkner, he can't gain any yards like he did with the Dolphins. So at the halftime, I went over to Jack Crumpy and said, who was that gentleman I was talking to? He said, oh, that fellow there? He said, that's Otto Preminger. So, I mean, it was interesting. And then, of course, yeah, it was. We were inviting athletic directors, college coaches to the racetrack as we were designing the arena to encourage them to bring their college teams to the arena to play basketball and stuff. And Brendan liked sports, so he was always wanting to be kept posted of what was going on up there. Sometimes he would show up, sometimes he wouldn't. But
What about John McMullen and the transfer of the Devils franchise to New Jersey?
You know, that was Arthur Imperator, a New Jersey fellow, a businessman, owned APA Trucking. He owned the Denver hockey team at the time. And being a New Jersey chap, I was more or less like in favor of him bringing the franchise to the arena. But there was, I don't know, people were saying that he wouldn't be able to get approval from the National Hockey League. And then the issue was about the basketball team. He didn't want a basketball team. Then there were a group that wanted the basketball team. And a fellow by the name of David Stern started coming to our meetings. I think he and Cliff were in college together. Rutgers. He came in many meetings. He did handle like negotiations to bring those franchises to the arena. McMullen, I didn't have any contact with him. The governor did. They were. I wasn't necessarily a hockey fan, but he didn't have anything directly to do with the authority. The franchise came, but he wouldn't be at meetings or anything like that.
Did you think that the arena construction was dependent on having two franchises, hockey and basketball, financially?
No, because our arena manager, we hired about 6 or 9 months before we opened, a fellow by the name of Laura Smith, who was a professional that he came from New Haven, was that the rock concerts were going to be the big money makers. I wasn't even aware of that audience, and there's a lot of things you learn. Like an example, we didn't spend $1 advertising dollar on a wrestling match. All we had to do was announce it there, and 18,000 seats sold out. There's an audience out there for these different things. I think it still would have been a success, but it was easier to have the two professional teams there.
During this period, I'm not sure if it was the opening Giants game in the stadium, but at one point, Brendan Byrne goes up to the stadium and gets roundly booed. Were you there that day?
It was September 1st, 1976. It was the opening day of the racetrack. I forget what day of the week it was, but whatever, the payday previous to it was the first time the withholding was taken out of paychecks for the state income tax. I was not there. I was in the state of New Hampshire on the vacation with my wife and young kids at the time. We had rented a cottage on a small lake. And they put him on top of a carriage right around a racetrack. There were 44,000 people there, and he was loudly booed because that was not a good move politically for him to ride around that racetrack. Historically, most political figures always get booed at sporting events. I've been at Yankee Stadium many times when they would introduce some elected official in.
During his interview for this series, John Degnan said that was one of his major mistakes, advising Brendan Byrne to go up to the racetrack.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other memories of the people that you dealt with in the sports complex, or some of the events? How about the opening of the arena? As I recall, the initial event, I think, was Disney on Ice or something, and then followed by Bruce Springsteen. It was a little bit more controversial. Your memory's pretty accurate.
I was chairman when Al Linkletter was on the board of Bally's. Then the legislature passed a law saying if you're on a board or involved with a casino, you couldn't be on another commission in New Jersey. So he resigned after we put the spade in the ground for the arena. Some of the structure was up, but he recommended to Bill Highland I be chairman of the construction committee because I guess I had the ability to say no to some people. It doesn't always make me a popular guy, but that was just my personality. So the Grad Partnership was the first arena that he designed, and Terminal Construction, it was the first arena they were building. So when the things went wrong, it was the architect or the contractor. So I basically was a referee of weekly construction committee meetings, and Bob Mulcahy then came up at the time. But at the board meetings to discuss who the opening act would be, the consensus was we'd like to get Frank Sinatra because he was New Jersey born, Hoboken. And in the negotiation, somebody reached out, and I think Mr. Sinatra's representatives wanted the New Jersey legislature to pass a resolution saying he was a great citizen or a humble citizen, or wanted some stamp of approval from the Attorney General. And Bill Highland, who had been the former Attorney General, was now our chairman, and John Degnan was the Attorney General. We just felt that that was an unreasonable condition preceding a fallback position was Bruce Springsteen for 6 nights. At that time, he was just reached the pinnacle of his success. And that's what we went with. The Disney on Ice event was an informal, like a preview of the arena before. But that night, July 1st, 1981, that the arena opened, we had some electricians up in the rafters literally holding floodlights that hadn't been attached, bolted to the rafters yet. And the staff told me that when Springsteen went off the stage and went down the entranceway where he fell in the arms of his handlers, he exclaimed that this is the best arena in America. So it made everybody involved feel pretty good.
Any other personalities, celebrities that you had some contact with?
You know, there were a lot of people probably with. I'll tell you, this. I had the opportunity to play tennis with Phil Simms because he used to play with Ray Walsh and Vic Del Gershio, the fellows who were on the Giant Administration, who were from Wellington Maris classmates in college. I guess the most memorable event was, I guess we can end it with this, was in his second term, the governor would have a touch football game in Giant Stadium on the Saturday between Christmas and New Year's. I think that was it. I'm not sure at the time, but so I was there with my two sons and a group of us, and and because he was the governor, I wanted to be on his team. But somehow somebody gave him he was one captain. I forget who the other captain was. Bill Combe, I guess. So they gave the governor the first choice, and he chose Ray Bateman. Because Ray had played, I think, football at Williams College, and then Combe chose me. So I said, "Oh, I was a little hurt and upset." So I played quarterback, and our side. I think I threw the first one or two interceptions, and Combe says, "You can't play quarterback anymore." I said, "Give me a chance. It's been a while since I've done this." But we ended up winning pretty handily. I remember throwing a couple of touchdown passes to Bob Carney, who was our assistant stadium manager, threw one to Dick Leone, who, by the way, I was very impressed with his gracefulness, smooth. He was great, smooth as an athlete. And I think one to Peter Levine was also, so that was a memorable event because he's a very tough competitor, Governor.
You bring up the name of Dick Leone. During the Byrne administration, you were put in a somewhat difficult political situation, given that Dick Leone announced that he was going to be a candidate for U.S. Senate.
I'll tell you that.
Opposing Bill Bradley for that nomination. Talk about your role.
That was, when you get in a situation like that, you wish you weren't involved. Dick Leone was a very competent, qualified guy to be a United States Senator. Alec Menza was the third candidate. He was a state senator in the Union case. Another competent guy. Leone probably had more statewide exposure being the state treasurer. Again, Bill Bradley, again, it was similar to what I felt in '73 about Byrne, that the name recognition was just going to be too much to overcome, and it would be very helped by the Republicans if he was the candidate in the general election, because the candidate was Clifford Case. I honestly did not believe that any of us could beat Clifford Case at that time, in the primary, before the primary. I went down to see the governor that Bradley was interested in having me support him. At that time, I was treasurer of the State Democratic Party. Dick Coffey was chairman, and Dick obviously was with Dick Leone. I went down to St. Brendan, I thought that, and Brendan said that they were all good. Dick and Bradley, there ought to be a meeting, and one of them has to drop out. Brendan said to me at the time. At the time, Henry Luther was his appointment secretary. He said, "So I'll get back to you." 2 or 3 weeks goes by, and Bradley announces for the United States Senate, the candidacy. And standing next to him is Henry Luther. I guess the mistake I made was not calling up Brendan at that time. to get the facts straight. And I assumed that Brendan said, all right, well, release everybody. So a week or two later, I endorsed Bill Bradley for the United States Senate, much to the unhappiness of Governor Byrne. And he told me, he said, I thought you and I agreed that we were all going to wait and have a meeting to see if we could get one of the candidates to withdraw. And you went ahead and endorsed them.
Did he call you up?
Oh, yeah. But Brendan, he would tell you, when he was unhappy with it. Yeah, he was unhappy, and I thought maybe that was going to be the end of a nice relationship, but ultimately Bradley won, and then the shock was that Clifford Case got lost at the primary. But yeah, and I felt bad, and I've seen Dick. We've been together and et cetera like that. I'm not too sure that Dick was happy with me, but again, I was not a vote against Dick. It was a vote for. My action was for Bill Bradley. Just I thought that and as it turns out, he again helped candidates in Bergen County in the general election with his coattails. That was not one of my most memorable decisions I had to make in politics.
And what was your relationship with Bradley during his time in the Senate and his presidential campaign?
In '84, I was his finance chairman for his re-election campaign when he ran against Mary Mashari. From '80 to '84, raising the money, I spent a lot of time with him, planning sessions. Bill and I developed a relationship as friends, and we still are. I more or less, with the passage of time, took a back seat in the night. I wasn't involved too heavily in the 1990 election, where he almost got beat by Governor Whitman. But presidential campaign, I contributed and raised a few bucks, but I didn't have that role. That was a national role, and I didn't have a presence on the national scene. But to this day, we still talk and get together once in a while, and we like each other a lot.
What other recollections do you have of political personalities over your career? You mentioned before Matty Feldman. What was he like?
Matty was a class act, but he was the type of person in politics that could delay a decision or make a decision to try and make everybody happy. He played Solomon very astutely. Another guy we had up in Bergen County was Jerry O'Connor, who was a freeholder director, a state senator. He was a rare person in politics, could tell you no and you still wouldn't get mad at him. That's a rare attribute in a politician. I would assume Dick Hughes was a similar type guy. He could just tell you no, and you still wouldn't get upset with him. Matty was an interesting person. I've told my wife and my children and friends that, as you know, Donald, in politics you meet the best of people and the worst of people. But I guess that's what the world is and life is really like. You ask me, back in '73, Dick Coffey and Ed Cravenville were great guys. If you're going to be in a leadership role, you're going to hurt somebody when you make a decision. I like Dick an awful lot, but I didn't think he would be as strong a candidate statewide as Brendan.
What about Al Burstein, a transplanted Hudson County guy who moved to...
Al Burstein, I think Alan Handler was a counsel, became a justice, and I think Stuart Pollock was next, became a counsel. And then when Stuart resigned, I had a conversation with Brendan. Who are you going to select as your next counsel? He says, well, I don't know. I said, would you consider Al Burstein? That's the kind of respect I had for Al. And he said, he won't take it. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, how do you know that? He said, I'm just telling you, he won't take it. I said, Jerry, you go talk to him. If he would take it, then come back to me. And I went and had a cup of coffee. John's Coffee Shop in Hackensack with Al Burstein, who was an assemblyman at the time, a practicing lawyer, lived in Tenderfly. And I said, would you consider it? He said, no. He said, I want to run for Congress. And that time with redistricting, part of that section of Bergen County was put in a district with Hudson County. He ran in a primary against a fellow by the name of Nick Mastorelli, and he lost. But Governor subsequently chose Daniel Hearn, which was an excellent choice, and it was an excellent justice. Very fun. But Al was of that caliber. Al Burstein was right up there with Daniel Hearn, Stuart Pollock, and Alan Handler. He was, I think, intellectually and integrity-wise. He's a Hall of Famer, Al Burstein, in my book.
Any other thoughts of other people of your time in politics?
Oh, I was very fond of Henry Luther. I thought that Henry was a very pragmatic person. I had fun with John Degnan. I have a warm spot in my heart for Cliff and Irene Goldman, the years that we spent on authority to be together at functions. I consider myself a very lucky guy. As my wife said, when I was the year I was chairman of the construction committee at the arena, I spent full time there. I wasn't working. Other partners doing the work at work, which created a problem. But my wife says we didn't make any money during those 6 or 7 years, but we really have a lot of great memories. As a family, with my wife and I and the children, we met a lot of fine people, a lot of memorable events that we attended.
Given your experience with the Meadowlands and the sports complex, what's your take on the situation now facing the Meadowlands with the new arena under construction in Newark and the Nets about to move to Brooklyn?
I was very disappointed over the years that the membership on the Sports Authority was expanded from some 7 to 9 to 11. I think it's maybe 15 now. Change is the spice of life. And when we were there, we were always thinking what was going to be our next project. At the arena up there, what are we going to do next? I think when you expanded that membership, you lost the intimacy of a small group of people who could be visionary and full of idealistic pragmatism. And I think that what's happening now, there could have been something other done to give other income to the authority years ago, which wasn't done. We were talking about having an indoor year-round, like glass, like in Copenhagen, the Tivoli Gardens, because that's seasonal there. But here there could have been a glass, huge dome put off in the. We were thinking about the northwest quarter of the site. I tried to, at the time, the Berries Creek Center field was to have us condemn the property across Route 3 where the Sheraton Hotel is, and the office building, to have us put it up. Do that because that would generate income if the track ever went sour. Our counsel at the time was my dear and close friend, Jim Cesali and Andy Cesali, and he was counsel to the authority, and looking at the neighbor league legislation, it seemed to say that, opined that we couldn't go off the initial 750-acre site, but history showing that we bought the Monmouth Racetrack, the Convention Center in Atlantic City, and the Kane administration with the aquarium. But in any event, I think that if we, that's what happened. We lost our vision with that. You have to expect the worst, and we relied on the racetrack too much to support the whole complex.
Jerry, before we close, any other thoughts looking back about Brendan Byrne, the Byrne administration, or your time in politics?
As I think I've said more than once during this interview, I consider myself very lucky to have met the people I have in politics. I mean, there's people in Bergen County that I still am very close with. Jerry Calabrese, the mayor of Side Park, Jerry O'Connor, as I mentioned, Leon Sokol, who was a good friend of mine, and other numerous friends I have there. And having the experience of knowing and working with a fellow like Brendan Byrne is not many. It was memorable. He's the definition of loyalty. To this day, I see him and he says, Jerry Breslin was the first one there the day he resigned. He's just always the first, always. And I developed a good friendship with Bill Bradley. I've had the opportunity to spend an hour at a diner with Bill Bradley, talking about different issues, the big picture, and you walk away, go to your car in the parking lot, you say to yourself, that's probably one of the best hours I've spent in my life in a long time. And Bill would have been, he's just an interesting person. And again, that's memorable. I mean, I've had some fond memories. In fact, as I say to people, I'm having a birthday tomorrow, a big one, but I look back and I say, I've been lucky. Both Brendan Byrne is loyal. If you were his friend and you did something for him, he never forgets. And the classic part of that is a lot of his administration, a lot of his appointments came out of people who were assistant prosecutors for him in Essex County. It's just a good trait to admire in human beings. Plus, he's got I think the commercial, we didn't talk about 77, but that was my 40th birthday, April 19th, 1977, when he announced he was going to seek re-election in the governor's anteroom there. And I brought down Joe Job, who was a popular sheriff in our county at the time, was a Republican, Democrat, whatever. And we were going to go to the opening day of the Yankee game afterward. In the morning, it's about 11 o'clock. And I looked around that anteroom, and I was the only person with Joe Job that was not an employee of the state administration. They had to support him that day. And everybody in Bergen County was for Bob Rowe. Vince Regolosi was Bob Rowe's statewide campaign manager. Peter Levine was in Passaic County raising all the money. Jerry Calabrese, who worked at the Board of Public Utilities, was the mayor of Cliffside Park. He stuck with Brendan, and a fellow by Ed Hines. The name of Ed Hines was an assemblyman for a few years. I got him to be the campaign manager. And in Bergen County, and Brendan had won Bergen County in a primary by 1,100 votes. That was the happiest day of my life, because Calabrese, Hines, and myself, along with Shelley Blum, took on the whole Bergen County Democratic Organization and apparatus. We were all behind Bob Rowe. And he only won with 28% of the vote, got renominated. But
did you think he would get renominated in 77?
That was a big question. The only thing I thought was, what happened? The only way he was going to get renominated was if it was a crowded primary. If 2 or 3 of those other people dropped out of the primary, I don't think he would have gotten renominated.
Did you urge him to stay in the race?
Absolutely.
Some people were saying it's embarrassing, you should just Drop out?
No, yeah, he says many times that John Degnan urged him to run again. I wasn't, he was there in the administration, I wasn't, but I urged him to run because he did nothing wrong. He did what had to be done. And I thought because of the opposition to the income tax that many people would run in the primary. It would be crowded, and he had a chance. If he got by that, he was going to get reelected. But that commercial that the fellow from New York made on the reelection, David Garth, the commercial where he stood by the State House, the shirt sleeve, rolling up his cuff, and said, "When I first ran, I told you I did not think New Jersey needed an income tax. I was wrong." I looked at that commercial and I said, I think he's going to win, because human beings can identify with that, making a mistake. That's all Richard Nixon had to do, was to go on television and say he made a mistake and he's going to fire John Mitchell as his campaign manager and apologize to the people and to the Democratic Party for the Watergate break-in. And history would have been different. But Garth made that, and I thought it was aesthetically brilliant commercial, but Brendan had to say the word. He had to say, go ahead with it. And, yep.
Any other closing thoughts?
No, it's again, in those days, I had a lot of fun in politics. And the people I was with, we've all mentioned here, including yourself, and then I got to know Tommy Byrne, Brendan's son, and we had fun. We went to a fundraiser. It was fun. I used to look forward to see people, not because I have to go to this event or this is another night out. Because I think we were doing things. Look at the accomplishments of the Byrne administration are mind-boggling. My mother was a retired school teacher from Rutherford, and her sister was the administrative aide to a U.S. Senator by the name of Ives in New York State. She was in Norwich, New York. So they were Republicans but I'll never forget having her at a Giant game in that 77 period, before that election. And Brendan was there, and she said to me, "I'm going to vote for him, even though he's a Democrat, because he instituted, I think, a $2 drug prescription thing for senior citizens." And she said, "That's important to me." And I was like taken. There's so many things that his administration did that I didn't even know about, being heavily involved. But I mean, Atlantic City, the Pinelands, the Meadowlands, the sports complex, New Jersey Transit, the income tax, so many things. The Open Public Meetings Act, the whole bit. I'm biased. In my opinion, I think he was the greatest governor in the 20th century in New Jersey.